A deal on Dickens, who could resist? A stack of Austen, warmly kissed. Golden Age crime tales twist and turn, every page a treasure to learn. Books keep coming home with me, piles so tall they're all I see. Turn a page and sail the sea, reading always feels so free.
Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. Going back on my trend, my series, I guess, of book reviews I'm trying to get done before the end of 2025. Some of them are more recent books that I read. Some of them are ones that I read much earlier in the year and just never got around to reviewing. This one here is one that I ended up reading because I saw it on hold on, it was, whose channel was it? Who was talking about it? It was, I had to think about it a second. It was Sue Jackson's channel. I'm not sure if she's down with Sue Jackson on YouTube or Susan Jackson. I can't remember. But her channel, she was talking about this book. I believe she listened to it as an audiobook. I did as well. I borrowed it through Libby. But towards the end, I ended up picking up as a physical book because I know that I want to reread this book and absorb it a little better the next time I engage with it. But the book was Gulp by Mary Roach. The reader for this was actually pretty good, so even though I'm sure I'll get more out of it the next time that I read it when I read it physically, I think that because the reader was so good, I absorbed more than I usually do when I listen to an audiobook. But it was the only way I could access it before the physical book came in because I wasn't willing to spend the money for a Kindle book. I'm really averse to buying Kindle books now, especially if they're anywhere near the price of a physical book, because I don't particularly like Kindle books. I've mentioned before, I've run into errors in Kindle books sometimes significant enough where like whole paragraphs are missing, or things are changed where it makes the meaning of the sentence the exact opposite of what it meant to say. And the only reason I knew it is because I was familiar with the work from previous readings on different, like from reading it physically. So I didn't read this book on Kindle. I had to listen to it because I was willing to engage with it on Kindle if it had been available that way on Libby or on Hoopla, but it wasn't. So audiobook was the only way I can engage with it. But I was interested because Sue Jackson, she made it sound really interesting. And yeah, I just really wanted to read it. And this, like I said, the reader is very good for the book. So if you do want to get the audiobook or borrow the audiobook, I do recommend it because I do think that it was done quite well. However, I usually absorb a lot better through a physical book, so I look forward to this. I would consider this a mixture of a memoir and a science book, and the reason I say this is while the author does go through scientific facts, and that is the core, the most important part of the book, it's the scientific part. However, she lets you go on this journey with her for interviewing each person who provides her the information. So you feel like you're kind of like in the passenger seat with her. So it ends up being a little bit more of a personal style of writing, but it works because she lets you see her talk to the people that she's interviewing. So the personal style doesn't feel out of place. Like usually I don't like a lot of a personal style when I'm reading nonfiction, but because she made it more of a memoir or more of a obvious interview versus like her writing everything down in a very factual way only. So what she might be sharing, information she might be sharing might be fact, but because she chose to present it in a memoir format / interview format, it allowed for a little bit of stylistic freedom where she could tell what she wanted to, like, tell the story, I guess you could say, but provide the facts in a way that maybe someone who's not as interested in science could more readily engage with. It makes something that might be a difficult topic a difficult or challenging topic more accessible for the average reader. But it doesn't feel necessarily like it dumbs it down or anything like that. I did enjoy the way it was written. I especially enjoyed listening to it. I'm interested in seeing if I hold the same view when I read it and I'm able to examine it a little more closely, as I am also, examining the scientific part of it more closely now that I'll be able to focus on it and, really hone in on what's being said in a way that I just don't do very well just via listening. But there were some really great things that were run through here, talking about some of the random things is how cats and dogs register taste differently than we do. Some of the other things were things like why we seem to like crunchy food, like the fact that, a crunch usually it signals like a freshness, like when you're dealing with a fresh fruit, like that could possibly have, a kind of like a psychological effect, like your body's kind of like, oh yeah, this is fresh, so this is good. Theoretically, that's the other interesting way that this book sets this up. Because she's having these conversations with different specialists, she is able to show them all talking together and bouncing ideas and thoughts off of each other. So it allows for a conversation in a way that feels natural and doesn't even necessarily feel like it's trying to push you in a certain direction. It just feels like a conversation. So I think that it's a style I've not seen a lot in like science books that science focused books that I've read. I'm interested in reading other books that she's written to see how I like this style in other topics. I believe there's one that she's written about not dying itself, but I think about maybe, I want to say it's about dead bodies or the morgue or something like that. I have it on Kindle. Yeah, which means I'll probably end up picking up physically at some point because I don't particularly like Kindle that much, but I'm limited on space and I can't really pick up library books because I'm homebound. I don't really want to lose a book that I can't easily return. Sometimes I have to make sacrifices and read a Kindle book, even when I prefer not to. But I enjoyed how they explained just some aspects of how the way that the digestive system works, how those things can go wrong, and how one of the ways that things go wrong, led to like Elvis's death. How, this was a matter of him having a messed up, I think it was a large intestine, if I remember correctly, because, again, I listened to it instead of read that part. I didn't absorb it as well as I pun intended, because part of its problem was like an absorption kind of thing. He had a motility issue, which caused a distension, which led to that, Fat Elvis appearance. So it talked to, she interviewed the doctor who took care of Elvis, who took on a lot of the blame after he passed, and then more study went into it, and they saw that there's actually other issues going on with Elvis that hadn't been taken into, like, it wasn't just this doctor's fault. Elvis had other complications of things going on. So, yeah, I really did enjoy this. It talked about, the way that, animals absorb certain nutrients versus the way we do. Some of the things are not for someone who has maybe a queasy stomach. I was able to read this while eating and stuff, but I'm also a former nurse, so we used to talk about just about anything while eating, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to catch a break to eat. So you got used to talking about almost anything. So that this book wasn't a problem for me to listen to, or when I eventually got it, to read where I was at while I was, doing whatever. But that might not be the case for everybody. Some of the conversations about stool might, not be the most comfortable for everybody. I did enjoy, they talked about how, when certain people got certain kinds of wounds, that let people look into, the abdominal cavity, how they learned there how the digestive system worked. And just not so, as seemed to be a lot of the times with some of the early studies, they weren't necessarily very ethical. I think they would be flagged by an ethics board now if some of the early experiments that really contributed to some of our knowledge about the gastric system were to be done now. It's the same thing when I read The Heart Healer. Some of those things that they did to discover, some really important, make some really important cardiac discoveries were not necessarily the most ethical ways of moving. So we've had those to build upon, but it's one of those things like, ooh, we couldn't really do that now because that probably shouldn't have been done then. But it was definitely a different time, although I can't imagine that it was believed to be any more ethical then. You kind of got the feeling some of the people knew that they weren't necessarily behaving the best and were kind of sneaking around with it. I know at least one of the cardiac doctors for the Heart Healers he would, do these different experimental surgeries at different hospitals back to back to back. So that way, if one didn't succeed, he could hop to the next hospital before, they register what was going on and try again and, just keep going. So some of these people definitely knew that what they were doing was not ethical. I didn't get as much of that sense in this book in Gulp, but yeah, there definitely wasn't always the most respect for the subject who was being not even experimented on, examined and studied. But yeah, they talk about things like how for a while they believed that if you just masticated the heck out of your food, that would make it so you absorbed all the nutrients better. How it used to take the people who were really into it. I think that was the thing that was called Fletcherism. Let's see. I'm pretty sure that was what Fletcherism is. But they would just, that was what they believed for a while. So they wouldn't even be able to talk or anything. They would just be chewing forever, and sounds really not like the most awesome meal experience. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting things in here. And like I said, it's just told in a fashion that works well for the average reader if they have a stomach that can handle this much detail about the digestive system. So you have things like I said, the difference between human and animal digestive systems, including taste and everything like that. And they start off with the nose and how that, like, they make their way, they go up and work their way down. And actually, they knock out one after another in a very logical order. I used to do my assessment in the opposite direction. I would start at the, bottom and work my way up. That's because I'd come into the room at the foot of the bed and I'd start the assessment and go the way up. But it makes sense to me that since this is a gastric study, you start the way that it comes into the body. You go nose, mouth, down the system. So I like the way that she has this set up. It makes sense. It's logical, just from an assessment point of view only. But she also really weaves it together very nicely in her memoir storytelling type way. Like I said, I've mentioned many times on this channel how I don't like it when an author inserts themselves too much, but she does it in such a way that it doesn't feel obnoxious because of the way she has chosen to present the information. The setting, the way she's, she doesn't just act like she's doing a textbook or even, a normal science book. This is like I said, it's almost like a memoir while it's giving you the facts. Talks about things like, can your stomach, digest itself? The idea of eating yourself to death. Going to talk about things like flatulence. It's going to, this is not meant for everybody insofar as it can be read. I think everybody could understand what's being said, but it's not meant for everybody insofar as not everyone is going to want to read what's here because your tolerance may vary of this kind of topic. I would not recommend this to my mom, who really does not like this kind of thing. And the same thing for my dad. So, but if you don't mind something that gets really down and dirty about what goes on with the body, goes really nicely in detail. I believe she has pictures in here. I haven't really had a chance to examine that too much because, like I said, for the most part, I listened to this book until I eventually picked it up myself to have it physically because I knew once I was done, I'd be returning the audiobook to library. And I knew already that I wanted to be able to read this again at some point and, get more out of it. And I might even read it again this coming year just to see what it was that I might have missed, because I think it will also go fairly quickly because I already have listened to it fairly recently. But yeah, I'm just kind of waffling on. I don't really have much else to say about this book. If you don't mind reading something that goes very, very deep into or just really, I guess it goes quite deep into how the digestive system works. If you don't mind that kind of thing, I would recommend this book. If you don't like that kind of thing, you won't, just move on to something that's not quite this detailed about a system that isn't necessarily the most comfortable for most people to read about. I think a lot of people who might not mind reading about, the cardiac system or the neurological system or any of those kinds of systems. I'm not going to mention respiratory necessarily because actually respiratory is one that I've always had. Everything up here, that was not my favorite thing when any stuff that came out of here. I hated dealing with that when I was a nurse. It's just everyone has their thing that they don't like. But yeah, if people who might enjoy, like I said, the cardiac or neurological or some of the other areas of the body, but still might find this not their cup of tea simply because it is people don't necessarily like to think about how it all comes out. A lot of people do find that a bit disgusting, but it is interesting. So yeah, okay, I've gone on far enough. I think I'm pretty much repeating myself. If you've read this book, let me know what you thought of it. I know, like I said, that Sue read this book and she seemed to really enjoy it. If anyone else has read it or anyone else has read any of Mary Roach's other books, what did you think of them? Anyway, I look forward to seeing what you have to say in the comments, and I will see you the next time. God bless. Bye-bye.
Books keep coming home with me. Piles so tall, they're all I see. Turn a page and sail the sea. Reading always feels so free.